Welcome to the International Day of Peace Interfaith Service. Mrs. Coretta Scott King used to talk about how each generation has to start the fight for freedom and peace over, because the pendulum goes back and forth. You can fight for a lot of things and have it all undone 20, 30 years later and have to start over. We may feel like we're in that place. We come together because we know we must find ways to sustain the power in this community gathered and communities gathered all over the city and indeed all around the world for peace and justice. For tonight's service commemorating International Day of Peace, we have turned to Mrs. Coretta Scott King and to a speech that she gave in April of 1968, just couple weeks after Dr. King was murdered, at a rally in New York City where he was scheduled to speak. Tonight we are honored and grateful to Tiffany Johnson and to her willingness to offer an interpretation of Mrs. King's speech.
My dear friends of peace and freedom, I come to New York today with a strong feeling that my dearly beloved husband, who was snatched suddenly from our midst slightly more than 3 weeks ago now, would have wanted me to be present today. Though my heart is heavy with grief from having suffered an irreparable personal loss, my faith is stronger today than ever before. As many of you probably know, my husband had accepted an invitation to speak to you today. I would like to share with you some notes that were taken from my husband's pockets upon his death. He carried many scraps of paper with which he scribbled notes for his many speeches. Among these notes was one set which had never been delivered. I simply read them to you as he recorded them. And I quote, 10 Commandments on Vietnam. Thou shalt not believe in a military victory. Number 2, thou shalt not believe in a political victory. Number 3, thou shalt not believe that they, the Vietnamese, love us. Number 4, thou shalt not believe that the Saigon government has the support of the people. Number 5, thou shalt not believe that the majority of the South Vietnamese look upon the Viet Cong as terrorists. Number 6, thou shalt not believe the figures of killed enemies or killed Americans. Number 7, thou shalt not believe that the generals know best. Number 8, thou shalt not believe that the enemy's victory means communism. Number 9, thou shalt not believe that the world supports the United States. Number 10, thou shalt not kill. You who have worked with and loved my husband so much, you who have kept alive the burning issue of war in the American conscience, you who will not be deluded by talk of peace, but who press on with the knowledge of the work of peacemaking, must continue until the last gun is silent. I come to you in my grief only because you keep alive the work and dreams for which my husband gave his life. My husband derives so much strength and inspiration from the love of the people who share his dream that I too now come hoping you might strengthen me for the lonely road ahead. It was on April 4th, 1967, that my husband gave his major address against the war on Vietnam. On April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated. I remember how he agonized over the great misunderstanding which took place as a result of his position on the Vietnam War. His motives were questioned, his credentials were challenged, and his loyalty to this nation maligned. Now, 1 year later, we see almost unbelievable results coming from all of our united efforts. Had we then suggested the possibility of 2 peace candidates as frontrunners for the presidency of the United States, our sanity certainly would have been questioned. Yet I need not trace for you how many of our hopes have been realized in these 12 short months. Never in the history of this nation have people been so forceful in reversing the policy with our government in regard to war. We are indeed on the threshold of a new day for peacemakers. But just as conscientious action has reversed the tide of public opinion and government policy, we must now turn our attention and the sole force of the movement to the problems of the poor here at home. My husband always saw the problem of racism and poverty here at home and militarism abroad as 2 sides of the same coin. In fact, it is very clear that our policy at home is to try to solve social problems through military means, just as we have done abroad. The interrelatedness of domestic and foreign affairs is no longer questioned. The bombs we drop on the people of Vietnam continue to explode at home with all of its devastating potential. And so I would invite you to join us in Washington in our effort to enable the poor people of this nation to enjoy a fair share of America's blessing. There is no reason that a nation as rich as ours should be blighted by poverty, disease, and illiteracy. It is plain that we don't care about our poor people except to exploit them with cheap labor and victimize them through excessive rents and consumer prices. Our Congress passes laws which subsidize corporation farms, oil companies, airlines, and houses for suburbia. But when they turn their attention to the poor, they suddenly become concerned about balancing the budget and cutbacks for funds for Head Start, Medicare, and health care appropriations. The most tragic of these cuts is the welfare section to the Social Security Amendment, which freezes funds for millions of needy children who are desperately poor but do not receive public assistance. It forces mothers to leave their children and accept work or training, leaving their children to grow up in the streets as tomorrow's social problems. This law must be repealed. And I encourage you to join welfare mothers on May 12th, Mother's Day, and call upon Congress to establish a guaranteed annual income instead of these racist and archaic measures. These measures which dehumanize God's children and create more social problems than they solve. We will be marching toward Washington soon. We will begin in Memphis, where my husband was slain, and kick off this Poor People's Campaign. We will be marching towards Washington to demand that America share its abundant life with all of its citizens. I would like to address myself to the women. The woman power of this nation can be the power which makes us whole and heals our broken community now so shattered by poverty and war and racism. I have great faith in the power of women who dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to the task of remaking our society. I believe that the women of this nation and the world are the best and last hope for a world of peace and brotherhood. This challenge is simply but profoundly stated in the words of one of the greatest Black poets, the late Langston Hughes. He called this poem mother to son. But it speaks to the sons and daughters of this generation and those yet unborn. It speaks of the determination and the indestructible spirit of Black people who refuse to be conquered. This spirit must somehow be imbued in the hearts and souls of women and their sons everywhere. Listen to this Black mother as she counsels her son with all of her ungrammatical profundity. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all this time I spent a climbing, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no lights. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on them steps, 'cause you find it's kind of hard. Don't you stop now. For I still go, honey. I still climb. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. With this determination, with this faith, we will be able to create new homes, new communities, new cities, a new nation. Yes, a new world, which we so desperately need. Thank you.
We must find ways to sustain the power in this community gathered and the communities gathered all over the city and all around the world for peace and justice.